So, using data to understand the challenges that our students face is actually sort of key. It's foundational to the momentum approach. Can also be kind of intimidating. We had a conversation, the data has been sort of filtering throughout all of these conversations. Today we're going to really lean into that. We're talking about, we're going to blend our understanding of what we know, what we can know from our data, what we can do with this knowledge, and how can we approach understanding it all with the aim of improving student success and eliminating gaps in outcomes. And that's sort of the thing that we have the data, but the data is there for a purpose. And so I'm really excited to have this panel together, because these are folks who I find myself referencing to other people when I'm looking for exemplars. So I'm really fortunate to be joined today by Dr. Tim Rennick. Dr. Tim Rennick is Executive Director of the National Institute for Student Success and Professor of Religious Studies at Georgia State University. I got Dr. Leslie Hodges. She's a Research Associate in the Research and Policy Analysis Department for USG. And Dr. Vince Miller, he's Vice President for Student Affairs, and Dr. Rob Friedhoff, Associate Vice President for Student Success at Valdosta State University. Rob often would note that it's not a Momentum Summit or any event without at least one person from Valdosta being on here. I have now met my contractual obligation to have Valdosta State featured. I'm really pleased to have all of them with us today. So I want to dig right in. And I'm going to start with you, Tim, not to put you on the spot, but to sort of start out here where with this question. So in your presentation and the work you do at the National Institute, you have a particular focus on bureaucratic barriers that hinder success. And it's a really interesting framing of the way of this. It's actually a fairly, I won't say unique, but it's a really interesting way to frame the way your work gets done. It came up in your consolidation with Perimeter, and you've spoken about this Atlanta campus as well. It echoes some of what we heard about with Greg Heilman's curricular analytics comments about structures as barriers. But I guess the question I want to start is, like, how do you begin to understand which parts of your bureaucracy are the barriers?
Yeah, a great question, Jonathan. Good morning, everyone. Great to be here. I don't think there is one as easy answer to that. I think first to say the reason we concentrate on bureaucratic barriers is these are areas that impact the vast majority of students, and the resolution to problems with bureaucratic barriers, if you can remove them, are going to therefore benefit most students. So we talk about scalable solutions. We've done a lot at Georgia State, and I commend it, to change pedagogy in the classroom, but that can be a slow slog, right? Getting individual faculty members to change what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. If you see a problem in the way you're communicating with students as they onboard to your university, or the way you're advising them about their program maps, or the way you're packaging financial aid, those solutions can quickly be scaled across the whole student body, and then are much more permanent in my experience. We've also had some frustrations over the years where we make great progress in redoing the pedagogy of a set of courses, and then 5 years later the faculty have turned over and there are new people in, bringing back the old ways they taught the classes, fresh from their experiences and so forth, and you kind of take a step back. But the changes we've made in bureaucratic areas, so-called the administrative areas like admissions, financial aid, communication systems, and so forth, have been sustainable. And we were able to replicate a lot of those same programs at Georgia Perimeter College when we consolidated with Perimeter now 6 years ago. So that's a preamble to that. Well, how do you begin? You begin by trying to understand what's not working. And the key question that I have posed in almost every presentation I give about this material is to ask the question, are we the problem? Where are we complicit in the fact that our students are dropping out, flunking out, leaving us without a degree? It's not because we're the only problem. I will readily admit it would be great to have better prepared students as they come to us from their K through 12 programs and so forth. It would be great to have more appropriations from the state of Georgia. And yes, it would be great to have all kinds of pedagogical changes going across the board in our courses. But what we started with at Georgia State a little over 10 years ago now is really focusing on what our administrative complicity is in the dropout rates for our students, because we knew that those were scalable areas that we had potential to make a difference in. And so what we do is look at data on a day-to-day basis and see where students are succeeding through those administrative processes and where not. You know, when we flipped to online classes at the beginning of the pandemic 2 years ago, almost exactly now 2 years ago, we began tracking all kinds of new data. Which students were logging on to the LMS, which students were not. Let's share that data with our advising staff so they can begin reaching out to the students who are not logging on to the LMS and hence aren't engaged with their classes. Let's break down these data by demographic groups. Are they our minoritized students, or our white students, or our low-income students, or our first-generation students, and so forth? Because then we can begin to figure out what kind of obstacles are being faced and the nature of those obstacles. In the case of that particular instance of students being participatory in their classes at the front end of the pandemic, we had a disproportionate problem, not based upon the race, ethnicity, or income level of the student, but on their class standing. Our first year students were tuning out much more so than our sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So that immediately suggested a strategy. It also suggested where we might be failing our students and where we need to concentrate our efforts. That ultimately led last summer to a new program we have at Georgia State. We call it an accelerator program, where we invite back first-year freshmen who didn't succeed in critical first-year classes in order to retake the courses during the summer so that they're back on track before the fall semester begins for their academic programs. That was a program totally that generated last spring out of the data we saw coming out of our platform. So it is this matter of discovery, of looking at the data and seeing what it tells you about the job you're doing as an administration.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I want to follow up here because there's something that Allison Calhoun Brown said on Monday during the panel that actually you just sort of sparked in me. So I'm trying to frame it. So we had this conversation about drowning in data. I'm hearing this, like you're talking about looking at this data day to day, and you're really taking a huge amount of, you actually took a huge amount of new data. You took all this D2L data and pulled it in. So there's a lot of data. And I asked her the question about how you don't avoid drowning in data, and her response was really funny but also I think telling. It's like the way to not drown is to become a better swimmer. And you're now working with institutions that are with the National Institute that maybe aren't great swimmers, and that's that thing I'm wondering is like, and I want to know how do you see folks becoming better swimmers in data? Like, what's the process that they should do if they come into this saying, well, it's just too much, I can't figure out where to start, or even I just don't even know what's out there to get the stuff I need to know to get to know it.
Yeah, we're actively working with over 30 institutions with the National Institute for Student Success right now, and they run the gamut from four-year flagship institutions to regional community colleges, and they have very different data capabilities. So we know one point is to talk about where you start. And the reality is, because we've now for over a decade at places like Georgia State, but other institutions as well, really drowned in the data, really used the data almost on a moment-to-moment basis, we have now tools that can streamline the process for other campuses. For instance, we're noted for tracking, it's going to be 10 years in August, we've been tracking all our undergraduates for 800 risk factors every day. That's great, and it gets the journalists' attention when they want to write articles and so forth. The reality, though, is after doing this for 10 years, there are certain early alerts that float to the top. And by saying to a campus, you don't need to track students for 800 risk factors, let's look at the ones that are most important, that have turned out to be most important as we've looked at the data over 10 years. And oftentimes they're the most commonsensical, and they're ones that are easily accessible to most campuses. A simple one I've already referred to is the student engaged in the class. If you have a way of either tracking attendance or you have an LMS, that gives you some clues of whether the student is engaged in the class. That's a really important early alert that almost every campus has access to. Another one, I was just at Augusta University last night talking to their academic deans and chairs. Look at the first grade a student gets in their major. We found a huge predictive value to the first grade that a student gets in a course they take within their field of study. The actual data at Georgia State is if you're a political science major, just to give you one example, get an A or B in your first political science class, you're graduating from Georgia State on time at average at about a 75% clip. If you get a C in that first class, you're a political science major, but get a C in your first political science class, you're graduating from Georgia State at a 25% clip. That's a really important bit of information that chairs and faculty and universities can make use of. I can tell you, for one, that Georgia State was not making use of it until a few years ago. And it doesn't require a fancy EAB, Civitas, or other, analytics package to get to those kind of data points. So what we try to do is get people to realize that while you can get swamped by the data and overwhelmed, there are really simple positive steps you can take. And each step you take builds confidence, but it also builds the next data question. Once you begin looking at students who got a C in the course, then the next question is, well, what do we do with those students? And can we track some data about which interventions are most effective? Should we sit down with the students, and have an advisor discussion, or a faculty meet with them? Or should we, ask them to take some additional coursework or go to tutoring and so forth, and begin to track those issues? And you build block by block a system that is evidence-based from that kind of questioning.
Jonathan?
Yes, sir.
I think I have a timely example of what we're talking about here, if you don't mind me sharing.
Oh, jump in.
Something that's happened here at VSU.
No, jump in, please.
Okay, so we are newly in launch of Civitas Inspire, which is an advising analytics tool. And to the point about data, I mean, it gives us more data than we've ever had access to. And it was we did soft launch in the fall and kind of all in here in January. And a couple weeks ago, I had a couple advisors come in and go, there's just so much. I don't know where to start, right? And while we've trained on the tool, what we didn't do is say, hey, let's talk about what your workflow is. Right. So instead of being like the tool does this and this and this and this is what this does, I literally said to him in a 3-minute video that I ended up creating on how to do it is, when I'm preparing for a student to walk in, I hit this for this information, that for that information, and then this for this information, and I feel prepared to go into a conversation. So I kind of reminded of that, keep it super simple, or however you like to say the KISS principle, but really taking it away from tool, and this is what this shiny new tool does with all these different data points, to, hey, when somebody is getting ready to walk in your office, here's step A, step B, step C, and then how you can go engage in that conversation so that they can take action from the data that gets in front of them.
Well, let me continue on with y'all then. So at Valdosta, you've reorganized, you've restructured, you've got some tools in place. How did you identify where to focus? Like, so you're saying that, the idea of like, do what you have to do to get in front of them, but it's a little bit more like complicated than that, I would assume. Like knowing where you want to focus your energies, knowing where, particularly as you came through the pandemic, where you wanted to put your energies.
Vince, you want to start a little bit on the back side of like where we started and how we've gotten to here, and then maybe I can answer that, what we're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I listening to Tim's conversation as well, I think, and thinking about where to start, for us, it's at some point, it's just getting started. It's such an overwhelming amount of information and data that's out there and available to us, and pulling the, limited resources, limited staff, and time really to get into it. But we know how important it is to start looking for and identifying those early indicators and factors that we may have some control over, and to be able to just find a place and start. And for us, several years ago, it really started on the engagement side and putting in an engagement platform software. We were tracking student participation in campus events and being able to look and see if students were attending events, were we seeing better retention from those students and a better overall academic success. And we learned that we were, and that was just kind of an early piece of this that we started looking at. And that's what led us to think, okay, beyond that, what else can have an impact? And so we looked, we asked a math professor to, if he would be willing to work and do an internal study, take all of our data and do some statistical analysis and see if we can identify the top factors that have a positive or negative impact on student retention. And for us as an institution, I mean, we gave him everything, access to all the banner data we had, all the engagement data we had, whether they were athletes, non-athletes, what their financial aid status was, anything that we had that could help us identify, those indicators. And so for us, we were able to learn that really that we had a couple of negative indicators, and that was, whether or not students took the math and English in the first year and passed those successfully, which we've learned quite a bit about that from the Momentum Year initiative. We also had those pre-professional programs where students, needed to achieve like pre-nursing, which we don't necessarily have that anymore, but there were certain classes that students needed to take and be successful in order to get into nursing program or education program. Those areas where students maybe were not getting into those majors, we were losing those students. And so we needed to think of ways that we can put them in alternative degree paths so that those students would still have opportunities to continue on. And then our first positive engagement was student engagement, students attending events on campus. That was our first positive indicator that we saw that it contributed to student success. So we had all of that was basically our starting point, which got us inspired to say, we've got to invest more energy into this. And I think that's where Rob and his team and their work in advising and professional advisement, investments in new software platforms that can help correlate all of this data together. And so we just, like I said, we just had to find a starting point. We just had to say, all right, we'll start asking some of these questions. Yeah, what if engagement's having a positive impact? What if math and English in the first year matters? What if, does our students' Pell Grant status, socioeconomic background matter? Does their high school GPA matter? And allow us to just start and asking these questions and try to get everyone some bit of understanding in some of these basic questions before we could dive even deeper. I saw one of my colleagues put on there, enroll everyone in marching band, and that is correct. Marching band as an activity has a very high retention rate. So I agree, Blake. If we can get half the student body in the marching band, we would be very appreciative.
Albeit you may discover that it does not work as well when you enroll everyone into marching band, particularly for the students who want to be in marching band and discover they're next to a trombonist who has never seen one before. So. So I want to actually y'all got me to a point where I think is interesting. So like with respect to what you both have sort of said, that you identified something you were interested in, you found something interesting, and then the thing I heard you say, Vince, and I think it sort of gets to the point, the next stage of you've done problem identification, but then how do we affect it, right? Like, so if you're doing your problem identification, you've now identified that there are things that we're doing either as bureaucratic structures or as processes and practices that aren't working, and it's the sort of knowing that is great, but then you sort of do a solution. You hopefully identify your root cause. You may not identify your root cause, but the question I would have is like, how do you do solution identification? How are you translating that knowledge, like other than rolling everybody into marching band, which may be a possible, you could actually put that on the wall and see if anybody wants to do it, but how do you get into that phase where, in addition to everybody enrolling in marching band, you actually identify how you get students to go from the problem identification to the solution?
I think for us, it was getting, sharing this information widely across our campus. It really mattered for us to be able to let others know that these are the things that we've learned about our students and what we've learned about student success and achievement at the institution. And these are the factors for us that matter, and getting buy-in across the different areas of campus. I know around my leadership table with student affairs, once we realized the impact on student activities and engagement and student success at our institution, all of a sudden it shifted how we talked about programming and frequency of programming and making sure that we had good marketing and how we get students engaged and involved. And I know one of the things that came out of this as well on the student success side of the house was the development of the Student Success Council. And it's a team that my colleague, Dr. Rodney Carr, and our provost, Bob Smith, co-lead. and it is made up of people from all across the institution that are just reputationally known as go-getters. Like they're just the people who are going to get stuff done, not necessarily based on title and position, but these are individuals that we are able to meet a couple times a semester and start looking at data and information and be able to say, how do we impact change? If this is what's happening and we know this, how do we impact change? And so we've got individuals from faculty ranks, we've got folks from dean's offices, we've got advisors, communication, student affairs staff. We've got, everybody's around the table who are now, we all know that these indicators matter. So now it's a matter of how do we create strategies and solutions? And for us, this was all happening at the same time that the university was working on the last strategic plan. So we were able to get more individuals aware of what we learned. We were able to talk about it more consistently, so kind of normalize some of these strategies. And they rose up, some of them rose up to be institutional priorities in the strategic planning process. And if they didn't make institutional priority, then they made divisional or college level priorities. And we started to see those measures become important in our work in those areas.
Jonathan, I'll add that, sometimes we're credited at Georgia State for being innovative. I'll say from the ground level, we never try to be or want to be innovative, at least as a first course of action, right? When we have faced problems, so a few years ago, we had a growing problem with summer melt. We had more and more of our confirmed incoming freshmen who were just not showing up for the first day of classes. It grew from about 11% of our confirmed freshman class up to almost 19% over a 5-year period. Our first reaction was to try what was off the shelf and already available as solutions out there. We emailed students. We set up opportunities for them to come to campus for workshops to work through the FAFSA and some of the issues that were holding them up. We tried to reach out to their parents. We set up a phone line and so forth. None of those things stemmed the tide. The summer melt rate kept going up. And that's where it went in 2016, we turned to AI and launched an AI-enhanced chatbot to try to cut through the clutter, provide information for students about what they needed to do to navigate all the bureaucratic issues that occur before they enroll, not being on campus, not responding to emails, not being willing to show up for training sessions and so forth, but by picking up their phones and using a texting platform. The first 3 months we had that new tool available, we had over 180,000 exchanges with our incoming freshmen about issues that they were facing. So, we got some credit. Oh, isn't that innovative? You came up with a chatbot. That would not have been our first choice. That was not going to be the cheapest or easiest solution because we had to do something new in that space. But we found that other things were not working. And the way we found other things were not working was, once again, via the data. We were tracking the data and showing those things were not working. We set up the phone lines, the students weren't coming. We set up the workshops, the students weren't attending. And so, especially the students who most needed the help and needed the support in getting through these issues. We also, by the way, set up a portal that actually tracks where students are in the confirmation process, which steps they've completed. And because it's a portal, we can see where each individual student is in that pipeline, giving us much better data and allowing us to do some of the innovative things we've done. Another innovative thing we did in that same space is we started contracting with a mobile health clinic. So when we do have physical orientations, we have a mobile health clinic out there to provide vaccinations, because we found that a huge obstacle for our low-income students was getting vaccinated for all the various things that they're required to get vaccinated for. And we would send them back home after orientation and say, don't come back till you've been vaccinated for measles. And they wouldn't have the bandwidth to really solve that problem on their own. So, the data showed us that the vaccinations were a big problem. Let's have an opportunity for these incoming students to get vaccinations on the spot. And for about $60 a pop, we can resolve that issue for the students. Again, innovative in one sense, but only innovative because more practical and commonplace solutions were not working.
So I'm going to turn over. I want to point to Leslie here, and sort of she smiles. She's not expecting this, but so in something that Leslie, this is actually getting this idea that like we tried this and it didn't work, and we tried this and it didn't work. gets at something that Leslie and Sean in their presentation sort of highlight. It's this idea of the use of logic models, which there's a whole bunch of us in the social sciences who, when we hear that term, we're going to go ahead and turn off our cameras and go and cry in a corner. But this idea of logic models is a way to understand, like, why we would expect a phone call to work or why we would expect a text message to work. So this idea, and so I wonder, but logic models are also, I mean, they're not common. So Leslie, could you talk a bit about like the way you connect logic models with intended outcomes and walk through that tool so that people can understand,
Sure.
like, if you're looking at a practice, what you should expect and how you know if it worked, because that's getting to that next point that Tim talked about.
Actually, I was just making a note so that I would come back to this, because what Tim just talked about, that process that he worked through with the chatbot, is an excellent example that could fit into looking at that in an organized way through a logic model. So it's sort of a backwards approach of the logic model, where the expected outcome was to reduce summer melt. So wanting more students who said they were going to come to actually show up and start their first year. So that is sort of what you want to happen at the end. Then working backward, okay, we want to see how many students are participating in these things that we do. That would be your output. Looking at your activities that you're implementing. Well, as Tim said, they didn't want to do anything new, looking at what's already been done. We have all these ideas of different activities we could do, calling students, having workshops, finding ideas that have already been implemented and might have some evidence behind that they work. And then looking, okay, do we have the resources to implement that? So once you do that, then you can say, okay, we have the resources. Can we do these activities that have some evidence? Let's track that. Let's track the outcome of how many students are showing up. Where are they in the process, just like Tim said, and then look at that outcome that you're interested in. Are you actually seeing more students showing up? Well, as you're looking through each of these, as you're implementing each of these pieces of that model, as Tim said, we're seeing, okay, students aren't showing up to these things. We're not seeing the outputs we expect of high engagement. We're not seeing students calling these phone lines. We're not seeing them show up to the workshops. And we're not seeing the desired outcome of more students coming who said that they were going to come to Georgia State. And so what the logic model does is it just puts all these pieces together, because as you said earlier, Jonathan, like, you know, you could be drowning in data, and even if you become a better swimmer, you could just be swimming in circles. You could be a great swimmer just swimming in circles. And what the logic model does is it says, hey, I actually want to swim to this island over here. And it gives you that, like, okay, I want to get here. And these are the things that I need to put in place. I need to consider, what do I have at my institution? What tools do I have? What resources, what staff, what knowledge, what money, what support? What kind of things can I do? And hopefully, starting, as Tim said, from things that you already have evidence, things that have already been done somewhere else that you have an idea of. What does it take? What do you need? Then you start seeing your data piece. You need to be seeing, okay, if I've done these activities, what's the involvement in them? Are people showing up? Are they being implemented? How many activities? That's where you decide the data piece, and you are intentional about starting to collect or pay attention to data that already exists, looking at that, and then it takes you to analyzing your desired outcome. Are you having more students actually show up? Are you having more students graduate? Whatever your long-term outcome is, so that you're actually getting there and not just drowning or swimming in circles or wasting time, resources, or just not helping students. So it's just another way to make a plan and to be intentional.
And I'll just say quickly, and it works, because by going through that logic and thinking about the different alternatives, we've since been able to reduce summer melt by about 7 percentage points. So the chatbot, along with some of these things like the providing the free vaccinations on the spot and so forth, have made a big difference in getting students to that goal of making it to the first day of fall classes.
Absolutely. So it's all those pieces that you talked about. It's just putting it into a way that you can make sure that you're not sort of getting off track, and that you see, we started this, that didn't work. Now we can go through another thing. It didn't work. We can see, even if you're doing multiple things at a time, what is working, what's not, and then start a new solution. Because it is, even though it's sort of, it looks linear, it is more of a cyclical process. So you are constantly evaluating, but it still gives you a plan to stay on track, and also helps you communicate that plan clearly to other people and get people on board really quickly with how that all works together and how it's tied together and why you expect the outcome you expect from the activities that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think for us, when we Vince was talking about the engagement information, right? What made sense then is, all right, we did this data, and we had Dr. Wang in mathematics come and say, hey, we know that student engagement makes a difference, and Vince said it. We shared it then with campus. Well, one of the things we did was put it inside of the advising portal so that an advisor could see how often somebody has been engaged. We knew what the number was, and then have that conversation and said, hey, if you've got a student who comes in and it's fifth week, sixth week of classes, and they've not logged into anything, it's time to have a conversation about, what are they doing? How are they enjoying Valdosta State University? Just because they're not engaged on our campus doesn't mean they're not engaged somewhere in the community, right? So you can't make a quick assumption that, all right, 0 swipes means you're not in a 40-hour week job or some other requirement that you've got to do. But to Tim's point, if they had 800 points, sure, all 800 probably matter, but what matters most, right? We knew on our campus that what mattered a lot was whether they were engaged. And so that data then became actionable. We could train on how you use that data on the advising front to have meaningful conversations, and then to hopefully help get people over to Blazer Link and presence in different areas that they could start to look for ways they could engage on campus.
And I think that's an underappreciated aspect of the use of data. We spend a lot of attention on contracting with EAB or Civitas and collecting a lot of data. What we need to spend more time on is operationalizing the data. Your average advisor needs a certain set of information to serve the student well. A big breakthrough we had a few years ago is we began to share not detailed financial data, but some key financial risk factors with our academic advisors and our frontline registration staff, so that they could see if a student has a financial hold on their account, or if they're at risk of falling out of compliance with SAP, or they're about to run out of eligibility for the HOPE scholarship. We have about 8 indicators. So when a student comes to an advisor or comes to the registration line to get help, even if they're getting help about something entirely different, there's somebody there who can say, oh, I see you've got a financial hold on your account, or I see you've got some SAP issues that you're facing and so forth, so that we can treat the students more holistically. The staff don't need or want detailed financial information about the students. In fact, at first they recoiled, oh, that's just another thing for us to deal with. But what we figured out a way was to deliver this timely information on the same screens they were using, so that they would know that that could be part of what they package in the support they're offering the students. And it's been absolutely essential. I mean, you can't be an effective advisor meeting with a student about who wants to drop a class or add a second major unless you know what their SAP standing is, or unless you know how much eligibility they have left on their HOPE scholarship and their Pell Grants and so forth. So it's made the service much stronger, as well as being a kind of a data enhancement for our staff and students.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Tim, is just making the data actually work for the reason you have the data. So instead of the data driving you, like you were saying, this is what I need out of it, I'm narrowing it down, and I'm making this serve the purpose that I need it to serve. Otherwise, it's a lot of stuff, but it's not useful, and it's not going to get you where you want to go.
Yeah, something that Michael Roethlisberger, who's going to be talking this afternoon, talks a lot about in his work is around sense making around the data, like, helping people understand what that means and helping them and it sort of makes sense of it. Like, this is a number, but what does it mean in respect to everything else, which kind of gets to that point. I want to come back to a point I was going to raise earlier, and I think this is actually a good point. So, you're identifying need areas for improvement. I'm curious about what the role of goal setting is in this, and also sort of where you look at, like, what's a threshold. So you're talking about your summer melt, and you weren't happy with it, and it was trending down. But the question is, like, what's a good summer melt? I mean, or is there a good summer melt? And and I think the same thing is true for, like, engagement. Like, what is good? What is a good level of engagement? And what are we shooting for? Is another thing to help sort of both create urgency, but also just to orient where we want to go.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Jonathan. I think the first answer is a really easy one, but it has meaning, which is be better, move the needle in the right direction. That's what we're always trying to do. We don't always know when we launched the chatbot to help us deal with summer melt. nobody had ever used an AI-enhanced chatbot to specifically address summer melt before. So there was no benchmark out there to say, oh, you can expect a 4-point or a 5-point improvement in these numbers and so forth. So we really did go in, trying to figure out what the impact would be. But benchmarking is critical. One of the things the institute I now direct is sharing with our clients are various sorts of benchmarks about these kind of numbers, because we're working with a number of institutions. We can say for other community colleges, this is what they're kind of seeing, and you're an outlier with regard to this respect, either in a positive or negative way. But we want to set aspirational goals. We want them to be very explicit. When we at Georgia State developed the strategic plan that has kind of carried us through our greatest growth in student success operations, this was back in 2010, we had very specific metrics. We said, we're going to reduce equity gaps by this amount. Our graduation rate is going to increase by this amount. This will be the increase after 2 years. This will be the increase after 5 years, and so forth. That was useful to keep people's mind on the target. But I was part of the generation of a lot of those targets, and I'll say, there's a fair amount of guesswork involved, because there are lots of variables that are going to contribute to whether the graduation rate goes up by 2 points or 5 points, or whether summer melt goes down by 1 percentage point or goes down by 5.
And I would say from the engagement perspective, when we originally set a goal, we used 2018 data that we were able to capture as a baseline, and we said, let's look at 3% growth. I'll say that, that is where our strategic plan initiative was. That's what we're measuring against. But I know the conversations we have within our student affairs team is we take a look at how many students are fee-paying students, and then we try to look at capturing, almost 100% of that population of our students through our programs and services. That conversation has shifted for us, mostly because we're looking at when we have limited resources as it comes to student fees, and we're looking at allocating those out annually, we've tried to measure how much of that dollar is impacting our students, how much are we spending per student on fee dollars, and looking at it across all of engagement. So it's shifted our culture on the programming side of the institution, because now individuals are using that annually to show how many students they're reaching. And that's become very relevant, even in conversations centered around today's legislative work that's happening in Atlanta. Being able to show value and return on investment in those fees is important. So we're looking at, even though institutionally we're looking at 3% growth year over year in engagement, divisionally we're talking about how do we get the majority of our students who are fee paying to engage through some area of our work. It doesn't have to be all areas of our work, but some area of our work.
Jonathan, it may be a little bit too simplistic, but Vince mentioned a word in there that I think is really important, which is benchmarking or establishing a baseline, right? And sometimes, depending on what you're looking at, or if you've completely revamped services, you've got to get a new baseline. And so sometimes that first year is getting that baseline and then trying to figure out, all right, if that's where we're at, where do we want to go next? I think sometimes if you're jumping in and like, all right, 4%, and you have no idea where you're actually at, it can be really hard to go from 90 to 94, right? But it might be a little easier to go from 50 to 54 in a year. And so sometimes it's just taking a half a second to figure out what it is you want to go after, get the baseline, and then start to make some decisions as to what that growth needs to look like.
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, the idea of ambition and ambitious goals. I mean, Tim, you talked about the fact that your original strategic plan was to reduce equity gaps by a certain amount, but in the end, what you ended up doing was eliminating equity gaps, which is the ambitious goal, right? And it's to be something that's a little bit more than folks could maybe think could be done, until you begin to really say, well, here's the tools to do it. So all of y'all talk about like working with communities on campus around data, and one of the things, Tim, that comes up in your presentation is this interesting story regarding freshman learning communities at Perimeter College, and the way particularly faculty were responding to this, about like, just because of their own lived experience, they were resistant to it. And so it sounds like you made a lot of trips back to campus about trust the data. How do you make people trust the data? which is a fascinating story, and it was told in a very measured way, but I'm sure it became a frustration to some ways, like we'll keep coming back, but it also gets at this point is as you work with institutions, either your own institutions, and now you're working at the National Institute with others, how does this play out? Like how do you help people trust the data?
Well, yeah, a great question, Jonathan. I think that story is in some way an affirmation of how, especially in an academic setting, data can be transformative. Because for those of you who don't know the details, just very quickly, when we consolidated with Georgia Perimeter College, we began to roll out some of the student success programs that had been successful at the Atlanta campus, customized for the perimeter context. Where we got the greatest amount of resistance was to a model that we have at the Atlanta campus for now a decade plus, where incoming freshmen are required to be in learning communities, block schedule learning communities their first semester. They're based on meta majors and so forth, but they're taking 5 courses in common with a group of 25 other students and traveling in all their first semester classes together, building up study partnerships and friendships and a support system and so forth. It's improved first-year retention and first-year GPA at Georgia State, but it's also improved the graduation rates. The gains that are seen in those first semester experiences actually then are transferable all the way to the point of graduation. So we wanted to try that at Perimeter, and we were told again and again by the faculty, this was ground zero for how little we at Georgia State understand the culture at Perimeter College, because the students are entirely different. They're busier, they work more, they have more family obligations. No way that this will work. And so we piloted through an RCT one fall. It was actually the second fall after consolidation, a set of learning communities, randomly selected students and so forth, and then another set of students who registered the way that incoming freshmen always do. And we were told all along, one, the students will not be able to take a block schedule. What we found after registration closed is that the students in the learning communities, although they were randomly selected, were enrolled for about 4 more credit hours on average than the students not in the learning community. So the block schedules helped them be able to fit more courses into their calendars and so forth. Then we were told in the middle of the semester this wasn't working. I've taught math for 25 years here, and this is the worst section I've ever had, and it's because the students know each other too much, or they don't, whatever the issue was. And so, obviously the grades rolled at the end of the semester, and there was still a lot of pushback. In fact, by the close of the fall semester, we were having faculty telling us, now is the time to shut down this learning community program. And we ran the grades. The students did about a third to a half a letter grade better in the learning communities than not. We were told by the math faculty, yeah, they did better overall, but our math classes were a disaster. No, they did better in the math classes in the learning communities than the students not in the learning communities. They accumulated more credit hours. They were re-enrolled for the spring semester at a rate 7 percentage points higher than the students not in the learning communities and so forth. So we went back and forth, Allison and I, meeting with different faculty groups and so forth. And you say, well, that's an issue of frustration, Jonathan. But the reality is, because of the data, because the data was so compelling, and because we had the ability to, in effect, respond to every one of the various criticisms that were being leveled. It's about math. It's about, how many credit hours a student can attempt. It's about retention for the next term. It's about long-term success and so forth. We were able to provide data. And I can tell you that after that first 6 months, we have not heard any of the large-scale resistance to the learning communities. Now, I'm not singling out Perimeter faculty at all, because we went through the exact same experience over and over again with the Atlanta campus, and now we're trying to impart some of this knowledge to the campuses we're working with by saying, here's how you prepare. If you're going to launch a new initiative, run it, especially because you can't scale it fully the first semester, run a mini RCT, use the fact that not all the students will get this new initiative to set up a good data set of comparative data set for the students who are in the initiative versus those who are not. And then have the data being tracked, not after the fact. Think about it in advance. Track the data while you're launching, so that by the end of the semester, you'll have a data set that tell you what's working and not, so you can make tweaks and improvements based on what you see in the data, but also because you need to share it with your campus community and show why this needs to be scaled or shut down. And we have shut down some programs and initiatives at Georgia State as well. So, that was, it was frustrating in the moment, but ultimately it was an affirmation of how doing data can, for an academic audience, really shift the tide. I'm not saying this works in every context, but academics are trained to respect the data. Most of the faculty, have advanced degrees in areas that require research of that sort and so forth. So showing compelling data can really make a huge difference.
Thanks, Tim. I want to go to a question that came in from Chair of Math at Georgia Gwinnett, Priya Bwendala, sort of related to the last question, but it gets actually at the process you just talked through. Is like, how colleges and institution-wide goals are communicated to faculty is specific, I think, to increase their engagement, is what she's saying. And but it is really actually like, how do you do this? How do you communicate the goals and somewhat the processes and, like you said, the data behind it to faculty?
One thing I'd say is you have to have somebody or some small group designated as the communicators. We assume when we do something and it works successfully and so forth, that somehow by osmosis, the campus community learns about it. But it takes a lot of work. I have dozens and dozens of times, invited myself to Senate meetings, to chairs councils, to different departments to talk about and explain it. And Georgia State has gotten quite a bit of attention for closing our equity gaps, graduating more Black students than any other school in the country. I recently went to a large department at Georgia State, just at the invitation of the chair to give an update of, kind of what we're doing in student success, what our initiatives are, what are some of the results. I'd say at least a third of the faculty responded, "Oh, I didn't know we were doing any of this. You mean we're graduating more Black students than any other? I didn't know that." So you can't assume that this is going to just happen. You have to have a communication plan for getting this information out there. If it is critical to your strategic plan, and if you have good evidence to support it, and I think those are two things we as administrators have to ensure with regard to our initiatives, then you should have a compelling argument, and you should be willing to share it over and over again and recognize the fact that there are new faculty coming in every semester who haven't heard, or in staff as well, who have not heard what's going on and need to be refreshed. I now invite myself, or Allison is now doing it, to every new faculty orientation, so that there's a half-hour segment on here's what Georgia State is doing about student success, here's our operations, here are the results, and so forth, because you can't assume otherwise that people will buy in.
And I would say also that I think infographics can really help with some of that. And even putting all those pieces together in a very simplified logic model can show how all of the pieces are being used and how they tie together, and why something seems like it's a little bit of a pain to implement, but why that would connect to what you're hoping the outcome will be. And that could just be a very simple boxes of the resources, activities, outputs, outcomes, and it just makes it very simple to see how that ties together in a way that's easily communicable and shareable.
Yeah, and I'll echo as well. I mean, I think from the institutional perspective, it seems like we're saying the same thing over and over, and we're re-promoting engagement or re-promoting some of these student success initiatives. But the reality is we've got to demonstrate that they're still a priority, and that we do, as Tim said, we do have new people who are part of the institution who have never heard it before. And for those who have heard it year over year, we've got to make sure that we continue to reinforce the fact that these things still matter, and it makes a difference to overall student success. And yeah, it sounds like a broken record. You've heard it before, or that matters, but it still has impact. And we can't say, oh yeah, we implemented that a few years ago and we saw success, so let's move on from it. We have to keep doing some of these things over and over that are still having a positive impact, or if we don't, we start to lose ground again in those areas where we've made progress.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons that the Student Success Council has been so successful here at VSU. And Vince, you talked about that before, but it's a cross-sectional representation of our campus. And we're talking about student success, and it's co-chaired by our VP of student success and then our provost. And we've got multiple deans and associate deans and other faculty member that sit in that space, and we're talking about what's working, but then also what's being tried in various areas, right? So Tim, that's one of the things you said too, is, sometimes it's you go to the AI because you've tried everything else and nothing else worked, and then we're going to go ahead and do that, right? And sometimes it's important for the campus to hear, these are some efforts that are ongoing or that we tried, and we know they don't work, but here's what we're going to be doing next. And then we've also got another group called University Council Plus, that I think many of these kinds of concepts and ideas are shared, and then the hope being that these updates, informational kinds of pieces go out from that place to where people have spheres of influence.
There was a hand raised for a second there. I want to make sure I don't blow past somebody's question, but all right. Well, so you made kind of an interesting point, Tim, about like doing a mini RCT, right? Like to measure to measure your to use the fact that you can't do scaling immediately as a feature of basically building trust and developing this sort of knowledge base, and to do actually near-term adjustments too, and track the data along the way. And I kind of want to go down. This is somewhat, I think, so for everybody. It sits in somewhat in Leslie's space though, is this idea of like, when we're collecting measures, one of the things that really becomes a challenge for folks is that what we're collecting means what we think it means. It's part of this conversation about the data as well, like trusting the data. So I'm wondering, like, how does how your evaluation models and sort of these ongoing assessments sort of creating data that mean what we say it means? And if you can talk a bit about sort of how you see that playing out.
Sure. I think sort of having a cohesive plan about how everything works together and being intentional about the data that are collected and being clear on the definitions of the data that are collected as part of a plan rather than as a reactionary post-collection can really help you understand how everything works together a lot better. So, here's what we're hoping is going to happen. Here's all these pieces that work together. So we need to be measuring this, and we need to know which students we're collecting it on, which means we need to have all these pieces collected, and we know it exists here. And it's just all those pieces of the plan. And if you don't have that, who do I need to talk to? What should be part of your resources? Where is this knowledge? Is it already collected? Is it exist somewhere else? Can I tie it together with data that I'm collecting maybe in this space? What do I need to do that? I need some sort of ID to collect that. And I think it just leads to understanding, once you're taking this big picture and making a plan of all of it, then seeing how those things fit together. I think if you try and say, oh, let's just implement something and see how it works without having all those pieces together, it could just become what do we have that's already? I don't know if this is what I actually wanted. Now I just have to kind of work with what is there because I didn't plan out if I needed to collect something else. Because if a piece of data exists, you don't need to collect it. Is it demographics? Is it their name? Is it their student ID? Well, those exist in your student information systems. So you might need to collect their ID number to be able to connect it to everything else, but you don't need to collect every single bit of demographic information because it can be connected to student information system. But if you want to know their feelings about a particular program, well, that's not going to exist in your student information system. So you need to plan out how you're going to collect it and how you're going to tie it back to information that already exists. And if you can make those pieces fit together, you have a plan for how to do it, you have the resources that you can do it, that you can access it, then you can trust that you are, as best you can, measuring what you think and what you're hoping to assess. So you want to know at this point how a student is feeling about the program, and you also want to know, are they showing up? How many students are showing up? How many students would be eligible to show up? Do you have all that in place that you can filter to that set of students? And so I think thinking it through on the forefront helps you plan for all those aspects that might be questions later on.
Thanks. Looks like we got a question from Fort Valley, which I'm going to invite you to come off mute and ask your question. We got a hand raised, at least from Fort Valley. There we go.
Good morning again, everyone. Jonathan, the centerpiece of our discussion today is bureaucratic inefficiencies, how to mitigate bureaucratic efficiencies in our schools. But we need to know what is the source of these inefficiencies. Number one. And number two, how are students prepare, our students prepare before they get here? Where are they coming from? What is their preparation level? Then we need to do what we call demographic segmentation. From what area? So that we know we apply what we call SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats by group A, group B, group C. Then we go, the next step is what we call what? How reliable is our data? Which data are we talking about? Primary data? How often do we collect primary data, or are we heavily relying on the secondary data that has been there for quite some time? This, and then we have also to do a two-way survey. Send a survey to the educators and send also a survey to students to find out where are they having problems. In short, then we can modify, then we can update. But the most important thing is preparation. Second is what? Orientation. Students need to be informed thoroughly before they start the game. In order to be successful, in order to what? To eliminate the gaps that used to exist, or the data from where it used to be to where it is today. And then one last is what? How often do we use what we call high impact practices? Critical thinking. Critical thinking. I teach supply chain logistics and management. I give them projects, teamwork, and I also assign weekly intelligence reports individually using 3 paragraphs. What is the objective? What is the result? Conclusion, source. So we have also to challenge them, and we have also to be challenged. Then chances are that bureaucratic efficiencies are here to stay, but all our job is to mitigate the bureaucratic efficiencies from where they are to where they need to be. This is all I would like to share.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I want to pick something out of that because it actually gets me to something that Leslie noted and came up actually yesterday during our conversation about academic mindset in the morning. Was there's a great deal of power that gets captured in sort of data that can't be counted. This sort of idea of using qualitative experiences in your data, particularly at the early stage, right? Like, so this idea of where do students encounter difficulty first. So they're going to report to you certain things that are they're not data points necessarily, they're anecdote, or they're stories that build on stories that sit in difficult places. And so as sort of a bridge question to the next stage of this conversation, I'm wondering, like, how do you view that sort of qualitative data, and how do you engage that into both your sense making and your solution making?
Jonathan, I'll take a stab at this to start and see where we go. But one of the things that where we played this out was in the orientation space, and it was kind of sitting back and watching the orientation experience from the eyes of the students and the parents, and watching stress kind of build over the course of a day based on how we had orientation built out, and everything kind of crescendoed up to the and now I've got my schedule and my orientation is complete, but there was all this kind of angst and anxiety throughout the day that was building, and you could just see it and you could feel it during orientations. And when we did in-person orientations last summer, we really rebuilt and rethought about how we could create a better space where the student and the parent could take some ownership over what they went and did when they first got to our campus. So instead of kind of the talking heads that is somewhat akin to the orientation experience, we invited them to check in, and then they had an opportunity to determine where they wanted to go on campus. And we had tracks available that they could follow. So if they weren't really sure, it was like, hey, go ahead and follow A to B to C to D, and you can go through all the parts. But what we were pretty certain is they wanted to know about housing. They wanted to know how the heck they were going to pay for it. And then they wanted to know about the advising front. And so we made those various spaces available on the campus, and they were self-directed, and participants had about 2 hours in the morning to what we said was the GSD walk, get stuff done walk, where they came to campus, and if financial aid was the really big concern that they had, they could go meet with a financial aid person right off the get-go. If it was they really wanted to know about housing and what that looked like, and until they got that information, they weren't going to kind of settle in and be comfortable. And so we changed that process to really be student, parent driven in the morning. And we saw a significant decrease in the stress part of the day and a lot more enjoyable, kind of relaxed engagement in the afternoon when we became a little bit more formal with some of the stuff that would probably look more like orientation experiences. But a lot of that was qualitative data, not quantitative, right? We sat there, we watched, we could see the stress levels build over the course of a day. We saw what was the big concern at the end of the day, and realized, obviously paying for college and what I'm going to be enrolled in and those kinds of things were really critically important. And then I think the other thing we did was, again, leverage the data that we knew from Dr. Miller's area and the engagement piece. And they set up a beautiful space inside of the main area where they were talking about engagement and being able to make connections, because obviously one of the other big questions you've got at orientation is anybody going to like me? Am I going to fit in, right? And so showing them that there's lots of different ways that they can engage in the campus in that morning, I think really helped us move from where we were to this is how it's kind of been run all the time and everybody needs 5 minutes of orientation, to flip it and think about, hey, how do we actually do this in a way that's meaningful for the student, give them some authorship on how they go through that experience, is a recent example on our own campus.
One point I'll add, Jonathan, is it's connected back to the previous discussion point where we're talking about how you get community buy-in, faculty and staff buy-in for some of these initiatives and the use of data. These qualitative components can be critical for that. When we launched our predictive analytics back in 2012, again, it was fairly early on in the development of predictive analytics and the tracking of students and so forth. There were some deep faculty concerns about this being too big brotherish and concerns about, whether the students would feel their privacy invaded and so forth. We set up iPads in our advising center, so every time a student left one of these sessions where for the first time they were getting engaged with some of the analytics and the data we were collecting about them, they could provide some initial comments and so forth. And it was just overwhelming how uniform the voices of students were about appreciating the data and actually feeling empowered by it. If you got a C in your first political science class and all of a sudden your chances of graduating in political science just went down by 50 percentage points, the students were saying, I want to know that, right? I want somebody to tell me that. The data has always been there, but nobody had been empowering me before to have this data. So the most common reaction we were getting was, where was this when I first enrolled? I needed these kind of data from the very beginning. And so it helps you inform what you're going to do as far as the initiative is concerned. But I can also say it becomes part of the campus buy-in process for people to know that these are what students are saying and the experiences they're having, which may be very different than what the outsider may imagine.
Sure, and I think too, what Robert was speaking to earlier, just a way to sort of tie all that in together and sort of the planning is, if you had surveys, maybe at the end, an opportunity to say from the initial way of like, how did orientation go? What do you think you liked about it? What was hard? versus the way that you flipped it, sort of a eat the frog approach where they could do the least pleasant thing, most stressful thing first instead of anticipating it. Then you could really have sort of a qualitative comparison of the feelings, so you have sort of a personal subjective feeling of that, but at least you could have maybe tied all that together, just as sort of like a taking it one step further and saying like, hey, this did work, and we have the feedback here from parents, from students, about how it was improved.
Well, and if I bring nothing else away from this conversation, I'm going to bring away eat the frog. So I'm going to use that. But no, I appreciate that. And one of the points that came up yesterday was also they were using some of the results from a classroom activity about students' experiences of challenge in college, in particular, as is at Pellissippi State, to provide faculty with a way of understanding the challenges their students were encountering. And one of the things that faculty were saying is this really builds a lot more empathy, and it was really important to start out the semester. So they use this sort of qualitative, you can put it in numbers, like how many of our students are Pell, how many of our students are experiencing homelessness, how many of our students are also parents. But the qualitative data built empathy. With the information is great, but that empathy was actually what you needed to build at the start of a semester when students will begin to encounter another set of students who look, what you would expect to be like the students who came before. To that point, I want to turn to sort of the impact of the pandemic. And this is a little bit about knowing our students and the idea that things have changed. So Joyce Jones and I have talked about this a lot. I think I've talked to all of you a little bit about, like, students have changed. What we have now is we have some data. We can actually drill out and pull out some meaningful information about data, and we have some anecdote. We have some anecdote about like how our students are different that we can't quite pin down. So I'm just wondering, at this point, it's anecdote with data around the edges is what I've been calling it. And I'm going to invite you to go out on a limb and say, like, sort of, what are the questions you're asking now about this sort of pandemic generation, this pandemic cohort, and how are you looking at them? How are they different than what we would have expected before? And I'm asking that question partly because this is an ongoing part of our conversation at the summit about what do we have to do, differently again, if we're going to be successful with a group of students who now that I'm thinking now that we've got all these things in place that we thought were working, we have a whole new group of students who are just going to mess up our beautifully built systems. And what do we have to do to sort of be ready for that?
At VSU, Jonathan, we're planning one-on-one meetings with you, and we'll know that you'll get them through, and we'll be in great shape. So thank you.
So I want to make sure you're giving my number out to all of your incoming friends.
Yeah. At orientation, your cell phone number is going on every slide.
Perfect. And I will make sure that I have a Georgia State University application, Tim, just so that, I'll just make sure I have that ready to go.
Chatbot is primed and ready, Jonathan.
Right. We're just going to, exactly.
I think that's an excellent suggestion, an excellent idea.
Go ahead, Rob. Why don't you start, and then I'll go next.
All right, thanks. Appreciate it. So, one of the things, Jonathan, that she's probably somewhere in October, I started just kind of writing down what I was hearing from colleagues and conversations and about retention variables and challenges that were there and what we were hearing, again, anecdotally around some of these things. And I think for us, what we've started to talk about is it's really trying to identify all of these various components and get a feel for what those actually are before we really can have kind of a game plan for how we move forward. And so, mental health and wellness obviously has become a huge component of the pandemic and how students are working through the pandemic. I've got 5 kids at home, 17 down to 7. My second son, early into the pandemic, said to me, he goes, "Hey, Dad, this isolation stuff is really isolating." And I kind of laughed and I thought, well, that's kind of funny. And then I stopped and I'm like, man, that's really actually quite profound, right? But how does mental health and wellness play out through the course of the pandemic? The financial component that is there with folks that have lost jobs and what that all looks like. Trade jobs and the conversations in marketing, our peers that are talking about come in 8 months and be trained and be in a welding career where you're making 40 some dollars an hour. And what does that look like? Student debt, value of higher education are all things that we've started to see. So we're kind of more so, I would say, Vince, maybe you have more to share, but I think we're more in the collection stage at the moment of these are all the things that we think have impacted, getting the picture and then trying to figure out where do we go once we have that picture a little bit more clear.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's certainly required us to be, to listen probably more so in a very meaningful way with our students and trying to understand what are the challenges each of them individually are having and what are we seeing as barriers to their progress. And, for many, the pandemic's not over, although there are some that say it is. And so we still have those that are still desiring, distance and campus experiences and alternative course arrangements. And then there are some that are trying to fight as hard as they can to get back to what they would imagine a traditional college experience would be. But I mean, we had an event on campus a couple of weeks ago and basically gave most of these students their first formal dance because they didn't have one in high school. So, it's real different. It's just different. And so I agree with Rob. We're making a pretty long list of things that we're hearing that are barriers to student success that we're going to have to start tackling one at a time to figure out how do we make adjustments to meet the needs of students and this things that we're hearing from our students now, which is certainly new and different from when we were hearing before the pandemic.
And I'll say that while we are in the early stages of trying to make sense of an ongoing circumstance that is new to all of us, there are some lessons we've already learned, right? There are things that are not just going out on a limb with 54,000 students. We've got good data to support a few observations. On the mental health front, one of the things we've seen convincingly, which will shape our behavior going forward, is that our group sessions are better attended now being virtual than they ever were face-to-face. So we offer, support systems for recovering addicts, for students who have eating disorders and so forth, both because we think the convenience factor of, joining these meetings virtually, oftentimes they're after classes and later in the afternoon or evening. That's part of it. But we also have heard from the students that they find it less psychologically intimidating to walk into a virtual room to talk about the problems they're having than actually physically showing up at a space. So that's pretty convincing. On a much more macro scale, we initially thought that we would see performance issues as we typically see based upon race, ethnicity, and income level. So that, our Pell students would be falling behind relative to non-Pell students, or that white students might be doing better than our minoritized students and so forth. We haven't really seen that. We have a lot of data now, and we've had a couple years worth of grades. In fact, our graduation rates we set records for our graduation rate, both at the Atlanta campus and at Perimeter. So what we found was the important distinction is our upper class people are doing just fine. Our juniors and seniors, they're retained at high rates, they're graduating high rates, their grades, their GPAs are maintaining strong. But across the board, regardless of race, ethnicity, and income level, our first-year students are struggling. That was true last year, and so we had a working hypothesis. Maybe the problem is our first-year students last year were facing all these online classes, right? And that was completely new, and we know from past data sets that our incoming freshmen don't do particularly well in online classes. So we put that to the test this fall because we have a second cohort coming in this fall, and yet most of our classes are face-to-face. And we've seen the same sorts of struggles again. So, what we begin to say, it's not purely online. It's in part, the experiences these students have had academically and otherwise in high school that's impacting, how they're doing once they arrive. So we're beginning to put some pieces together that help us understand a little better what's going on. As I alluded to earlier, it's also helping us to begin to focus some resources and some new initiatives like that new summer accelerator program to get our students who are getting more D's and F's in required courses during the freshman year to be able to catch up during the summer with all kinds of added supports to allow them to do so.
Thanks, Tim. And I really love the way that also sort of gives a window into your process too. Of, you know, that didn't work, but we're gonna, you know, we'll keep looking. Chip Reese just raised his hand. I have a feeling I know what Chip wants to say, but I'm going to go ahead and let Chip say what he wants to say. Hey, Chip.
Hey, thank you, Jonathan. I appreciate you letting me jump in here for a second. You know, when you start talking about mental health and what we're up to, that's what I'm living right now. I hope that all of you out there are aware of the mental health initiative, and I'm on full-time loan now to do that. I just want to give this group a little bit of an insight into where we are and what we're doing. Just take just a couple of minutes. You know, as the pandemic came on, I think all of you are familiar with Gear One, and the governor gave $11.5 million to the university system to put mental health processes and services into place. And it really was a kind of throw it against the wall. We really don't know exactly what we need to do. We were looking at it as a there's a lot of things going on out there. Let's get as many services out here as we possibly can. Right now, we have a consortium, which is vice presidents, deans of students, directors of counseling centers, you know, the people that are on the ground and administrators that are working to identify baseline services as we move forward, as we start moving out of grant money or you know, gear. We've got Gear 2 coming up, but as we move out of the grant money, we're looking to try to get some you know, some budget dollars moving forward. But here's the thing: is what we've tried to boil it down to, and I think this is what hits the point with this, or I hope that it does, is that we're looking at this from the standpoint of, you know, why do we have a university, or why do we have a university system? You know, what is the real core objective that we have? And it's enrolling students, it's helping those students in persistence and retention, and then graduating students so that they can be successful and have economic impact and wonderful lives and things along those lines. So it's what we're doing is we're trying to narrow that down into what are those baseline services that help students in that progression, retention, and graduation situation. And so I hope that you're going to be seeing more of we're going to be coming back with more surveys and things along those lines. We're going to be doing some focus groups. I had an opportunity to visit with Jonathan yesterday. We're working with several different groups as far as gathering data and crunching numbers. But at the end of the day, it's those stories. So we're trying to work down to find those qualitative stories that are saying this impacted my life, to help us really figure out exactly what are those baseline services that all 340,000 students at all 26 institutions need. So we're very much in I think the same boat that you guys are. You know, once we get them, keep them, graduate them, help them be successful. So Jonathan, thank you, sir.
Oh, thank you. And if anyone has questions about mental health initiative, I'll say Chip Reese is pretty easy to find in the system. If you need his number, I'll gladly give it to you. Right. So that the conversation about the pandemic and the way in which we're as institutions different. I mean, I'm actually going to say this. Part of our response to the pandemic, I think, did make us different institutions. It made us fundamentally. There's a degree of that the experience we've had has shaped the way in which we respond to our students and the context we create for our students, which I think is a powerful message about how quickly an institution can respond. It's the other thing I think in this case making is like when you start to look at like how can you transform an institution. We've done it once, and we didn't think we could have lifted it before. So I think that's that's something that I've taken away from it at least. I want to shift. I'm going to sort of come to the sort of the final piece of this, because part of this session was framed about this idea of identifying opportunities, but then also closing gaps. And one of the things, Tim, in your presentation, I think you're sort of known for is this idea that you weren't in the process of closing. You've actually eliminated the achievement gaps at Perimeter in a pretty short period of time. And you do this in a counterintuitive way. And I want to sort of highlight this and sort of ask you the question that you maybe can't answer necessarily, but you take an approach that is not to focus on special populations. You don't talk on special specific programs. You talk about intentionally raising the level of service and support for all students. But the effect, as you note, is that students who have been historically disadvantaged in their experience with the institution, it realized the greatest gains. And I'm just going to kind of ask you the why question here, because I think it helps to understand the what. So why do you think this counterintuitive model is so successful and efficient at addressing what are pretty stubborn equity gaps?
Yeah, a good question. So yeah, not just at Perimeter over the last 6 years, but over now 10 plus years of these programs at the main campus for our bachelor students, we've seen gains for all demographic groups, but disproportionately the gains have been for our low income, our Black, our Latinx, and our first generation students. So as a result, we've had a number of years now, just 2 for Perimeter, but we've had 6 years where race, ethnicity, and income is not predictive of a student's chances of getting a degree from Georgia State. And the reality is none of the programs we're most known for. So our use of predictive analytics and proactive advising, our use of micro grants, our Panther Retention Grant Program, the chatbot, the AI, the meta majors and the learning communities and so forth. None of them are targeted by race, ethnicity, or income level. So it's not that more low-income students are, in those programs than others, because these are all required programs or required assets, available assets to all students. So why have we seen that? I have 2 explanations. I don't think they're purely theories because we have some data to support this, but I will admit that these are not the result of RCTs. One is that, we have competitive admissions across the USG. It requires you to do certain things to get into our programs. Our bachelor's admissions at Georgia State are clearly more competitive than our associate degree admissions. But the reality is most of the students we serve at Georgia State, we're now 75% non-white, 60% Pell across Georgia State University, a little higher than that actually at Perimeter. Most of our students are not coming from the best resourced high schools in the state. Right? We have very few students coming from private high schools. We have lots and lots of our students coming from in-town high schools that often struggle to deliver high graduation rates. So the fact that these students are able to meet the admissions criteria to get into our bachelor's or even our associate's programs shows that they have grit and determination and certain abilities, and giving them the right kind of supports may disproportionately benefit them when compared to those students who we admit coming from middle and upper income backgrounds and so forth. The second thing I'd say is there's a stigma to a lot of the student success programs we introduce across our campuses, right? Students may benefit from being in a learning community, but if they see that learning community as something that is targeted for them because they're first generation and low income, there's immediately a resistance put up that may not be overcomable. And we saw that when some of these programs, like our learning communities, were optional. When we had opt-in, we had about 45% of the students opting in, including a lot of the students who we most needed in learning communities not opting in. When advising wasn't proactive but required students to come and self-identify and come to the advising office, what we found is the students who could most benefit from advising were not the students who were self-volunteering and showing up and making appointments and seeing their advisors and so forth. By normalizing all of these programs, by saying it's just the way we do things at Georgia State, what I think we've done is reduce the stigma. One of my favorite stories every January is that we have a whole new group of first-year students who have started in the fall. They get exposed to all of this. They meet their advisors in the summer, months before they begin their classes, and they're in meta majors and learning communities, and they're getting proactive alerts, and they're on the chatbot asking questions and so forth. And they go home and talk to some of their high school friends about what their experiences were at different schools. And they come back and say to us, oh, I found out that these kind of programs aren't available everywhere, right? I'm surprised I learned that they're not doing that at institution X and institution Y. And I say, 2 big thumbs up to that, because that's exactly what we want. We want the students to accept these supports as just everyday operations of being a university student. This is exactly what it means to be at Georgia State. And indeed, the students are great ambassadors for that. Our sophomores and juniors, when the new students come in every fall, say, oh, of course you're going to be in a learning community. I did it last fall and it, had these benefits and so forth. So I think there is an inherent benefit. There are financial benefits, more efficient to scale programs across the whole student body, at least on an FTE level. But I think the real benefit that's kind of hard to put a finger on is the mindset benefit, the benefit that students gain from thinking this is not a program I'm in because I'm deficient in some way. It's just a program I'm in because I'm a college student.
Thanks. Mrs., you want to say something? You came off mute there. I want to give you the space if you want to. I mean, I'm curious, like, so, you guys have a focus on gaps as well. You have a focus on, so what are you working on? What are you challenged on in that space?
Yeah, I mean, I think normalizing it is definitely the key, and helping students understand that all of these are just success initiatives, and that we provide a whole host of opportunities and resources to support them, and that it's not that doesn't seem to create where students feel like I'm in a certain category of students because I'm less successful or I had worse grades or any of those things. I think that's what's really important, is that we show an institution of care and support, and that we're together just helping to provide you with your pathway of success. And here's some things that we think wraparound services, support services that help you get where you're trying to go. And that's, I would say, probably the most important piece.
So I'm going to come to the end of what I have sort of scoped out here, and obviously y'all can take this where you want. But this is, so at the end, Tim, at the end of your presentation, you actually make a really powerful point that about the higher ed as being a vehicle for social mobility. Like this is in the end. I mean, we've been talking a lot about student success in college, like getting them to graduation. But in a lot of ways, they didn't come to college to get a degree. They came in college to be better than they may have been elsewhere, to have better life outcomes. There's an ROI for a student that that is more than the degree, but it's the life outcome that comes from having that degree, that as against if they hadn't. And so, and I don't, and there was this conversation. I remember when Chancellor Wrigley was going around, we had these conversations about the fact that we might be losing the information war on this, that there is an ROI on higher ed, particularly among students who are going into debt for this. And so, but we also know that it's not true. We know that students who graduate college have better life outcomes than those who don't. And there are particular institutions, Georgia State being among them, that really are engines for that social mobility. But one of the things I think we don't have in a great way is, like, we don't have great measures for this. There are some models out there that do that, but I'm wondering, like, how are you measuring your sort of impact on social mobility now? And again, something for everyone to think about is, like, how could you measure this better? Like, what would the measures be if we were to look at this in a more systematic way, or in a way that we could be more confident about the way we're delivering that?
Yeah, it's a great question, Jonathan, and it is kind of at the frontier of where we need to move our student success discussions, in part because of political conversations against higher ed, but in part because our constituencies, including our students and their families, need better information about what this investment will result in. And, there are some important talking points here. It is still the case that the average bachelor students, although there are discrepancies based upon degree program, but the average bachelor students will have a greater income. The current average nationally is about $900,000 more over their career compared to the individual who only has a high school diploma, more life choices, better health care, longer life expectancy, and so forth. And that is an argument we have to articulate to our political constituencies, because every 100 students we graduate, if they're each generating $900,000 more over their careers, that's huge added income for our communities, tax bases, and so forth. But there are two areas where we've really been focused most recently. One is on these social mobility metrics. We don't have the ability in Georgia to calculate these numbers for ourselves, because we don't have the ability to track student outcomes using state records like income tax records and so forth. Some states actually do have that ability. In Georgia, we don't. But there are national studies that do have access to federal databases along those lines. The strongest I would recommend is Raj Chetty's work at Harvard. Raj Chetty has mounted a project called the Climb Project, where he's looked at thousands of U.S. universities, tracking the financial difference between students' economic standing as they matriculate at a particular institution versus their financial standing 15 years later, and asking the really important question, how impactful are different institutions in taking students from one economic bracket as they matriculate, which is usually their parents' economic bracket, and then moving them to become upper income students 15 years later. It's fascinating data, and almost everyone on this call, your institution will have data in that Raj Chetty data set. The other thing we're doing, which I think is a more democratic process for all institutions, is we're partners with a new startup called Stepping Blocks. Stepping Blocks has the ability to scrape the internet to find your alums, looking at websites like LinkedIn, but also professional websites, job websites, looking for people who list your institution as their institution from which they graduated. When we do alumni surveys at Georgia State, kind of the old-fashioned sort, we get about a 4 to 5% response rate. From my view, it's garbage data that comes in. We're asking them how, what's your career and where are you working and so forth. It's not a representative sample. But since we've been working with Stepping Blocks, they've found about 170, 180,000 of our living alums, which is about 65, 75% of them, and can actually disaggregate and aggregate the data to tell us really interesting things. So if you're a political science major at Georgia State, you can go on the political science website and see what our former political science majors are doing. Not just political science majors nationally, Georgia State political science majors. What companies are they most likely to work for? What are their estimated salaries? What job titles they have? There's even a process where they can link and communicate with some of these alums if the alum gives the permission and so forth. But I think that's the wave we need to move to, is much better information for our current students about what their careers might look like afterwards. What we're seeing already is this kind of data put in the hands of our incoming students is having some influence in their choices of degree programs. I've been in some of these legislative sessions where we get the knee-jerk reaction, oh, well, you should get rid of the psychology major or humanities majors because those are not as productive for the workforce and for after graduation. We all know that it would be almost unthinkable to begin controlling our students' decisions in that kind of very dramatic fashion. But you can influence the student's decision by sharing with them, as they're picking their majors, here are career outcomes. Here's what happens if you're in this major at Georgia State versus that major at Georgia State, and make a more informed decisions. It's empowering to the students, and it's also shaping our understanding of what the outcomes are for our students. So that's where I think we're heading, is to collecting much better data sets about alumni outcomes by these publicly available sources. It doesn't require any FERPA permissions because this is information that our alums have put out there about themselves, but we're collecting it and aggregating in ways that can help our current students.
So other thoughts on that? I'm wondering, data sources, processes, and plans. I mean, I think these Stepping Blocks I've seen a little bit about, and the Climb project is really interesting to look at. And again, our students are asking for it, and they are, and in many ways, it's part of this closing loop. We come back to, like, when you're starting out college, what can I do with this major that I've never heard of? And we're going to talk about this tomorrow a bit about purpose too. There's a conversation about students' purpose. Many of our students are showing up with purposes that don't align necessarily with the traditional high-value careers, and they're surprised to find that you can actually be an environmental scientist. You can actually do something in social movements where that's your passion, and there's a career in that field, and they have outcomes that are going to allow them to raise a family and have the life that they may want to have. Angie Bell put in the chat, just so you know, USG is joining a partnership with the U.S. Census Bureau, provide better data nationwide on labor market outcomes for our graduates. I don't know much about it. I'm not sure if Leslie has much on it as well. If Angie wants to come off mute, she can, although she may not be able to at this point.
Hi, let me get my camera on as well. Yeah, we're just joining this partnership. It'll be a few months before this data gets surfaced, but it'll be, like Tim was saying, this will be publicly available data, available for students to go look out, constituents, stakeholders, et cetera, to go back and see across the country, not just in Georgia, where our students are winding up, what industries they're going in, what their wages are, et cetera. And I think it provides the data piece that the stepping blocks information can really add color to. This information won't say exactly that, you have gone into some sort of social service mission, sort of biology oriented job, but that stepping blocks information provides that color, the anecdotal thing that provides inspiration to students that can ground figures that some people might find boring. So look forward to letting you know about that in the future. It's going to be a great tool to complement the ones that we have now.
Thanks, Angie.
Yep.
So at that point, I have come to the end of my list, the end of things I have, but I know that there's so much more that y'all have to share. I invite y'all to, if there's more you want to tell, if there's more of your story you want to share, Robin, Vince, Leslie, Tim, last words, final thoughts, things we forgot.
My last thought is we talk a lot about the way these kind of data can help us as administrators, faculty, staff members across the USG to do our job. What I think we've seen at Georgia State, which we weren't anticipating but has been transformative, is the way these data can empower students to be treated as full partners and as adults in these processes. By sharing these data openly with our students, they can make much more informed decisions. The big change we've had in student behaviors at Georgia State are not predominantly from policy mandates that are forcing students to do something they didn't do in the past. They're primarily from giving students better information at key junctures of their student life cycle, so that they can be autonomous and make the decisions that work best for them. And that really is a kind of unspoken part of the move to data at Georgia State.
I think as a data person, maybe this might sound strange, but I think a sea of data is not always the best approach when you want to help people. I think being targeted about what you need and what you share with people and making it accessible are really important pieces to take into consideration about what you collect, how you use it, how you share it, and being very intentional about each piece of that.
I was just going to add, I think the importance of hearing from the front line, the crew that's working day in, day out with all of the students, and the ways in which they're seeing and hearing about change, and making sure that there's a feedback loop to the right folks to be able to take that into consideration, to make sure that anecdotal day in, day out lived experience is also a part of what we get to understand as we're looking at the data. And I think as we're in the middle of the pandemic, that's never been more important.
Yeah, and I'll echo that and say hearing from our students as well. We learn a lot just by having conversations with our students and asking how their experience is going.
There we go. Blake, do you want to come off mute? And you got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll follow up. Rob and Vince sort of stated it there. We're talking about gathering data. We're talking about we have all of this information and opportunities for people to be part of the conversation. And there are these ear to the ground moments that if we are very careful and deliberately communicating and sharing our goals, they present themselves. So yesterday in our Dean's Council meeting, actually, the head of our Information Technology Division shared with us an observation. We optimized wireless service on campus as a result of the pandemic and expanding those activities across campus. We were finding by following the manufacturer's preferred settings and operational norms, people were encountering problems, and they were getting dropped off of the system because the system continuously tried to optimize the delivery method based on the device. And I'll apologize to anyone in IT because I probably really just botched that. However, by looking at those problems and reports, they went back, looked at the way the system was working and how people were using it and where, made some adjustments, and in a very short time, with just an investment of listening, understanding, and putting the time and changing the parameters of that system, the number of complaints about access to wireless services across campuses are almost negligible. And that's just a matter of paying attention and communicating and improving a service. And that changes dispositions, it changes student mindsets, it changes complaining calls to parents, it changes culture. And so it's always circles back to communication and closing the loop and really having a spirit of collaboration and cooperation.
Thanks for that. There are any other further comments? Go ahead and please raise your hand. I will say this has been a really great conversation. I really want to thank you all for joining me for this today. I feel sort of like this was a personal inquiry of people whose opinions I really seek out quite a bit. And then I just with an audience. So I appreciate y'all joining me on this journey. This has been absolutely illuminating for me. We are actually going to pick up some of this conversation this afternoon with a slightly different cast of characters, but we're going to have Bernard McCrary come from Georgia State talking a little bit about more of their targeted work with African American males. But we've also got Michael Roethlisberger, again, more data, actually getting kind of at Leslie's point here about like, you need to maybe shape and sculpt this a bit to help people make sense of it. And again, Sean Baser will be here from RPA to talk a little bit further about this process. But it's going to be a great conversation today at 2. I want to also, we had this conversation in this, and I want to sort of prime everybody who's left. We are going to have a conversation tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock about what student success even means. And it won't be me talking. It'll be small groups. You'll be sent into smaller groups to really shape out what you think this means. What do we need to be looking at now and next? Because sort of in this conversation, it's become clear there are some key indicators we always want to track, and then there's some new things that we maybe need to know about, and we may also just be missing the mark. And sort of on Carandus Ziegler's conversation yesterday, who's shaping your narrative around student success is really important, and getting input from a broad set of constituents is really important. So again, I want to thank you a lot for joining us today. It's been a fantastic session. This was recorded. It'll be posted. We'll capture the resources in the chat. Those will also be available through the Momentum Summit 5 course. You should have a link to all the sessions coming up in your inbox, as well as on the Complete College Georgia website and Momentum Summit course. So they're there for you. If you have any feedback, go ahead. Again, feel free to shoot it to me in an email or however you want to. But I just want to say again, thanks so much, and enjoy the rest of your day. And we'll see you this afternoon.